This is the IBJ podcast for the week of December the 9th, 2019. I'm Mason King. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. That's the sound of the Butler University basketball team taking the floor at historic Hinkle Fieldhouse here in Indianapolis. Butler has been widely hailed for using its basketball program to elevate the profile of the university to a national level. It's quite a feat, really, for a small to medium-sized private university in Indiana to be part of the national conversation every March. Recently, Butler has achieved fame in the academic sphere as well. For the last 2 years, it has ranked as the #1 regional university in the Midwest on U.S. News and World Report's list of best colleges. However, there are plenty of reasons for Butler University President James Danko to lay awake at night. Most experts see a potential catastrophe brewing in higher education. There are a number of reasons, including a steep decline in potential students in the next decade, combined with an oversupply of institutions that are spending too much money. Small, private universities are considered to be among the most vulnerable. The ratings agency Moody's says 1 in 5 small private colleges is currently facing serious financial stress. Harvard Business School professor Clayton Christensen has predicted that as many as half of all colleges and universities in the United States will be bankrupt in the next 10 to 15 years. And indeed, we've already seen a spate of closures in the Northeast and Midwest. And earlier this year, DePaul University in Greencastle, one of the nation's great liberal arts institutions, laid off 57 staff members through mandatory buyouts and offered voluntary retirement packages to about 100 full-time faculty members to reduce its expenses. So, how well is Butler positioned to weather this crisis? Is it one of the 20% of small colleges facing serious financial stress? Might it be one of the colleges to declare bankruptcy in a decade or two? Butler is in the middle of a huge fundraising campaign called Butler Beyond with a $250 million goal. It's intended to help fund a $100 million investment in the school's science facilities and its new $50 million business school building, as well as to boost its endowment. It's also designed to help support a new strategic direction that could address some of the challenges ahead. So I asked Butler President James Danko about the school's current financial position and whether it will still be around in 15 years. Here's our conversation. President Danko, thanks so much for making time for us today.
Glad to do it. Thanks for being here, Mason.
I am going to start off with a spiel about what I gather about the financial pressures that are facing higher education. It's about 30 seconds long.
Okay.
And then you can tell me if I'm anywhere close to what you understand as reality.
If you got it down to 30 seconds, you've probably got a lot more.
So here it is.
All right.
Enrollment in colleges and universities has been dropping for several years. It's expected to hit a cliff due to lower birth rates in about 8 to 10 years. Colleges are spending lots of money to compete, and in some cases their revenue is declining. Tuition costs continue to rise, which puts college out of reach for some folks. Now, some people believe that higher education as we know it now is unsustainable under these conditions, and in particular for private colleges. The most dire predictions have as many as half of all colleges and universities closing in the next decade. And while that's pretty extreme, I think there's a general agreement that small private colleges are the most vulnerable. Am I close?
Yes. Well, I've always learned, not just in this particular issue of higher ed, that things are never as dire or as great as people say, right? I mean, it depends on what angle you have or what, and many times, limited information you might have. But generally, it's pretty clear out there based on demographic trends, based on rising tuition costs, based on student debt load, that it has become highly competitive in industry now that price sensitivity is real where it might not have been 15, 20 years ago. So that is something confronting every university. And again, in terms of people going to college, it also depends on the sector, right? So the publics are growing. They're, in fact, in some cases, well beyond their capacity. And some of the smaller privates at the other end of the spectrum are indeed suffering some serious challenges right now.
So an analysis by the rating agency Moody's says 1 in 5 small private colleges is facing serious financial stress. Mm-hmm. Is Butler one of those?
No, we fortunately are not. I think Moody's has it right. Butler has been in a very good position, and frankly, our Butler 2020 strategy, which started 8 years ago, was very much premised on elevating our profile so we could get closer to the top of the pyramid of universities of our type and be in a position where we were receiving more applications, we had more options, we would increase our revenues and so forth. And fortunately, that strategy has paid off for us, and our applications have gone from 6,500 a year to nearly 17,000, and we find ourselves in a very nice wave financially and applications and so forth. However, even as I said recently in the interview in the IBJ, I wake up every morning worried like crazy about that day. So the trends are against us, and we have to really think about how we reinvent higher education to address those problems.
That was interesting, that comment you made in the article. It read something like, I wake up every morning afraid that we're behind. We're falling behind.
Yeah.
Falling behind in what?
Well, I think that's also a natural instinct that I've always had anyways. I always feel like you need to work harder and meet whatever challenges. So whether it's in my current job as a president, I felt those ways in other jobs. But in the industry, just because of how fast I think this kind of tidal wave is heading toward shore when it comes to the demographic issues and the financial issues and the inability of families to afford education, there's some large mega trends. For example, the decline of the middle class, that really worries me. So if you go back 20, 30 years ago where, the middle class controlled a more significant percentage of wealth, they were in a better position to deal with some of the cost of education. So those things coming at you, if you're not waking up every day thinking, how are we going to address those challenges? How are we going to have Butler prepared? How are these families going to be able to afford education? There's something wrong with you if you're a university leader and you're just kind of, thinking, oh, everything's going to be fine. It's not necessarily going to be fine.
I have a 4-year-old. The only college he's ever seen in his life is Butler. So he thinks this is it.
Yeah.
This is it. As a future Butler parent, I want to ask you a few quick questions just so I can vet Butler. Is it going to be here in 14 years?
Absolutely, it will be here in 14 years. You have to think about different forms of education. We have to be thinking about not having just one type of education. We've been very heavy over the years in undergrad residential. That particular market, I think what's happening with technology, different types of educational providers that are now out there, there's going to be a different set of choices in 14, 15 years, whenever your son might be looking at that. So whereas in the past, they might have all gone to, hey, I'm looking at a 4-year residential program. Well, now they might be thinking about this online program, or maybe my background is a little bit more technical, so I want to go down this particular path. So universities have to prepare themselves for different types of learners, and they have to adapt to the changes in technology that are making knowledge transfer different and easier. What does that mean in terms of how a person is going to be educated moving forward? So we have to change our way of thinking about what a college or a university is.
Have your accreditors given Butler a clean bill of health?
Absolutely. And by the way, you mentioned Moody's. Also on the financial side, we've been very pleased that the ratings agencies have continued to improve our rating based on their financial analysis as well. So that puts us in a good financial position.
Yep. Are you able to pay your debt?
Absolutely. In fact, Butler is one of the few universities, as even our auditors have mentioned, that have kind of a year of expenses accumulated and saved. So we're in a good position. We're coming off a couple of our best financial years, and I'm worried like crazy about next year. I mean, that's part of the pattern. You have to keep kind of moving aggressively ahead to stay ahead of what's happening out there. 14
years from now, when my son applies, how is Butler going to be different?
Well, it gets back to what I said earlier. There might be different options, right? So you're going to have different ways, kind of a menu of options that fit both the learner, the student, and the families in terms of how they're going to finance that education. And right now we operate in this, go to high school, go to college for 4 years, go to work. Well, how might that cycle or that pattern change over time? What would lifelong learning be like? What if you did, I'm seeing more and more high school students deciding to take a year off, perhaps they want to do some service work or they want to travel. So your son maybe in 14 years might decide, you know what, I want to start getting some college credit while I'm in high school, and geez, Butler does that, and now I want to take a year off and, geez, I wonder if I'll get credit if I do this program over in Europe, come back, go to, I want to live on campus for a year. Then I'd like to do a career opportunity here that might provide some income. So what we have to be prepared for is kind of a mass customization, if you will, right? How do we adapt to a marketplace, a group of learners, students that are all unique in their own respect? What higher education hasn't done a good job of is thinking in this kind of broader customization model. We're very much sage on the stage. We've got 20-some students in a classroom. We've got X number of professors. The model is that's the thing that has to change. That's why we are really, people see the challenges that we're going to have in terms of how we sustain. So for me, where it starts is having a culture of innovation and change embedded. Make sure that you're not so married to everything you're doing now that you can't make the changes, because we have to move faster. We need to respond to issues in a much quicker way than we ever have before. Even coming into this job, when I talked to those that were looking to hire me, I talked about we're not going to budget cut our way to success. It's bigger than that. Yes, we have to be efficient and effective and so forth, but we also have to think about new opportunities for the future.
Let's take a quick break so we can hear from our sponsor and pay some of our bills. This is the IBJ Podcast.
The IBJ Podcast is sponsored by Krieg DeVault, a trusted and dynamic law firm representing a wide variety of local, regional, and national clients. Committed to each other and to every client, Krieg DeVault prides itself on integrity, professionalism, respect, and excellence. Financial institutions, global manufacturers, national healthcare providers, and successful organizations of all sizes and market focus rely on Krieg DeVault to create innovative and successful business solutions. Connect today at www.kriegdevault.com.
Okay, we're back with the IBJ Podcast. I'm Mason King, and we're talking this week with Butler President James Danko about the pressures facing small private universities. So based on the spiel that I had at the beginning, where we talked about how expenses are going up, there's a demographic cliff coming up. What are a few of the very specific initiatives that Butler is undertaking?
Our board of trustees, we've been talking about this for the last couple of years. Early this year in March, we had a really, really important board of trustees meeting. We actually brought an individual in that talked about some of these challenges that are going to confront many organizations beyond this. It's somebody that I've long time respected, Blair Shepard, who was the dean of the Fuqua School at Duke and is now with PwC. He's done a lot of research on kind of some of the global trends and how that's going to affect organizations like Butler. We came out of that, we were already kind of on high alert because we've been talking about these changes and how we're going to confront them as a university. But what we also came out of that saying is we need to be more flexible. The board put in motion Butler setting up a separate entity from the traditional structure. Sometimes it's hard, not just in academics, but many traditional organizations to change from within. But if you set up a new path, and you have a path of innovation that's open, that doesn't have the same limitations, the same obstacles, the same policies, procedures, you're in a better position to get into some new relationships, partnerships, work with industry. And so rather than wait for Amazon or Apple or Google to start their own colleges, how can Butler do that? So this new entity, which we are still defining, it's a work in progress, is going to be a path for Butler through which we're going to be able to drive innovation and change in a much more aggressive way. The fact that the university did that Butler was thinking on the leading edge to do such a thing, really provides me a great deal of confidence that we're positioning ourselves for things that are going to be different in the future. Right?
That sounds like something that I've heard of in a lot of businesses,
Yes.
especially a lot of tech businesses,
Yes.
where they create an innovative division, essentially. Like, these guys, we're going to put these guys over here in this
Unfettered
office.
over there, they don't have the same obstacles. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And is that essentially the idea?
That's exactly the concept. These things that are coming at us, whether it's wealth disparity, whether it's the aging population, whether it's artificial intelligence and what that means for the workforce, those things are coming at us fast. And it used to be that the world of higher education, that's where you found the solutions to those problems. Well, we're not even moving fast enough to address those things that are coming at us at a pace really that's unprecedented. it. So we're all kind of in this together, and what you find happens when those things, those trends or mega forces are coming at you, that's where a lot of organizations find themselves out of business, no longer relevant. So what we've got to be thinking about is what's going to happen in 2030? So how do we plan for that? And you can't wait till 2030 to make those types of changes. So what gives me the greatest confidence about Butler right now is our openness to change and innovation, different forms of education, and also to take on some of these mega challenges. So those families that can't afford a Butler education as it might be today, well, what are we going to do about it? One of the challenges that we set forth for ourselves is to kind of like the moonshot of 1960s. It's like, what if we wanted to cut our tuition by 50% or 60%? How could we deliver an effective undergrad education for a fraction of the cost so that we could make sure that higher education is available to those that might be socially or economically challenged? That's something that we're challenging ourselves to do. And those types of challenges are driving some great thinking and maybe a redefinition of the way we do education.
How do you do that without losing money on the student?
Again, how do you land on the moon, right? I mean, at this point in time, there's a lot of work to be done between here and there. And we know what it takes right now to educate our traditional undergrad residential student. And believe me, I look at these budgets all the time, and every year we start the conversation of let's not raise tuition, and you see the rising cost. And by the way, there's a lot more to tuition cost than meets the eyes. The reality, you talk about you mentioned some of these private universities that are in trouble right now. The reality is based on, they give merit aid out, there's financial aid, there's a combination of financial aid that in many universities, they might be saying that their tuition is, say, $35,000. The average might actually be 60% less than that. We have a bit of a weird pricing model, which I too, there's a lot of us in the industry wish we could figure out a way out of. But the problem is every individual has their own financial situation and their own intellectual capability, so to speak, which is a merit issue. So the true cost of education at a private is actually more obtainable than people recognize.
Well, I know some of these initiatives are encoded in the Butler Beyond campaign, essentially. Is that a good way to describe it?
Yeah.
Just very briefly describe for the folks at home, what is the Butler Beyond campaign?
What we're doing with our campaign fundraising is it's aligned with our strategy. What we've come out of this now, we had a Butler 2020 strategy, which was to simplify it, very focused on infrastructure issues that we were confronting, whether it was a need for a new business school or improvement to our sciences facilities, even some underground infrastructure issues we had to deal with, and with elevating our reputation and awareness coming off of our basketball success of 2010, 2011. We are in a much better position in terms of our recognition nationally. Being in the Big East is an important part of that as well. And so we're better known. We've got more applications. We've solidified a lot of basic things that we needed to do. The new strategy is going to be very much focused on the educational side, right? And we've kind of carved it into three segments, right? One is our traditional undergrad residential, where we've been so strong and 85% of our students kind of go down that path, right? So for us, we need to innovate within that. We talk about it as tradition plus innovation. So that's one area where we're going to have a group of people focused on. The second is getting more heavily invested in lifelong learning. And what does that mean for someone post-undergrad? How might we work, for example, Infosys is coming into Indiana, right? They're building a beautiful facility out at the airport. How could we partner with them as they're bringing 2,000 people into Indiana in terms of what their range of needs are across their employee base? Let us be your educational partner. So let's open ourselves up to that. You don't have to start your own company, educational side. Let us partner with you. So the lifelong learning model. And then the third is what I talked about, getting back to our core mission, our founding mission, which was to provide access to education to those people back in the 1800s that did not have access to it. So what does that mean? How can we cut the cost of education, maybe work with some nonprofit organizations, maybe work with the Indianapolis public school systems to make sure we have students coming through Butler that might not be able to under the current financial model.
When you bring up the concept of lifelong learners, is that in a way a strategy to avoid the problem of the traditional high school graduate cliff that we've been talking about? that there are fewer traditional college students coming out of the high school pipeline, that you can make up for that by recruiting more older or non-traditional learners. Is that the strategy, or am I just making too much of an assumption?
The majority of your audience here is a business audience, I presume, right? So to put it in business terms, it's diversifying our revenue streams. Right now, we have a lot of eggs in the undergrad residential model, right? And so we know that all those things you talked about are kind of hanging out there, the demographic cliff and so forth. So you really need to kind of make sure you've got other revenue streams coming in. Butler has, again, we are a strong educational institution. I've been at Dartmouth, I've been at Villanova, I've been University of Michigan. Nobody is doing it better than what I've seen at Butler, right? We're hitting it out of the park when it comes to the educational model. Now we need to think about how that transfers to somebody that's 30 years old, or somebody that perhaps wants to come in and out of college. How do we adapt? Again, it's kind of a customization model to open up new revenue opportunities, new educational opportunities.
Now, there is a financial goal.
Fundraising goal is $250 million.
Okay. And how far along are you?
We went public. It's been kind of in what we do in the world of higher ed. You have kind of a silent phase where you try to raise at least half of the money before you go public, and we've raised $171 million. So we are well on our way, and we're above kind of the trend lines that we had put in place.
And what is the end point of the?
That's 2022, August 2022.
Okay, so a
right?
little less than 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And some of the specific items that money would cover would be, for example,
this cost of education, where I mentioned, again, I don't know that it's well known out there, but private schools fund all this merit financial aid. When I first got here, kind of right off the top line, put back out there for incoming students was a total of $50 million. Now it's $70 million. So whereas we're taking tuition revenue in, we're pushing it back out in the form of merit aid and financial aid. And so that has to be funded. Right now we're funding it, for example, out of our tuition coming in. We need a bigger endowment, so we've got some endowment earnings to help with that. So scholarships would be one big form of it.
What is the endowment currently?
Our endowment now is, oddly enough, around 250, about equal to what we are set out as our campaign goal. Yeah.
Where would you like to see that?
Oh, my God, far higher. This is, again, where our industry, it is so odd when you look at the competitive reality. So I always remember when I was up at Dartmouth, and I left Dartmouth, this was 2005. I think Dartmouth's endowment at the time was $2 billion. It's probably double or triple that by now. And I went to Villanova, and their endowment was about $250 million. Now
is that right?
Now it's 3 times that, I believe. And I came to Butler, and they were sitting at about 180. So I kept going backwards in terms of the endowment. Certainly the reputation of this in the educational side was strong across all 3 of those. But every institution is playing with a different size endowment, which gives them a lot more financial flexibility, right? That's where, again, you're finding some institutions, the ones that are really in trouble right now, they're looking at their incoming class, how far they're falling short, and also their size of the endowment. There's a few predictors out there. If you've got a very small endowment and you're living out in a rural area of the country, right, and you're finding yourself falling short with your incoming class, you're going to have some serious financial issues.
Mm-hmm. Is there a best practices for the size and the endowment relative to the size of the university? Is there a place where you really know you need to go?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's any specific metrics that say, okay, for this size institution, this is the size of your endowment. Because again, if you look at them, they're all over the map, right? And there is some correlation between national or international prestige of a university. I mean, look at the Ivy Leagues for one example of that, or look at, even if I look at some of our Big East peers like Georgetown and others that have been around, their endowments are fairly sizable, or some well-known. Wake Forest would be another one. So I don't know there is a exact formula for that. Part of it is a function of how sophisticated your fundraising program has been over the years, and the culture of and the tradition, I think, in families of giving back to a university, right? I'll go back to my Dartmouth days where, there's a long-standing tradition at Dartmouth, amongst Dartmouths, that you give back to your university. So they're dealing with 65% of living alumni giving back to Dartmouth. The places like the Butlers and others are maybe getting 20 or 23% of their living alumni giving back. And they aren't going to have as deep a pockets, aggregate wealth, say, in Indiana than they would if you happen to be in New York or Boston, right? The Harvards or the Yales and so forth. So they're living with long legacy of giving and families that have believed strongly in philanthropic causes and so forth. We're dealing with different cultures sometimes here in the Midwest and with a different set of wealth. Our students over the years haven't been going to Wall Street and accumulating wealth like they might in certain other schools. So
at the end of the Butler Beyond campaign, is there a certain amount that you expect to allot to the endowment to get it to a certain level, 300, 350?
Given that we're pretty heavy on the capital improvement, we're put up a $50 million business school. We're doing $100 million for the sciences. A lot of that is going to be funded out of the campaign. I would hope that maybe a third or so of what we raise ends up increasing the endowment.
So your contract recently was extended for 4 years. What are your goals for the next 4 years? How is Butler going to be different in 4 years from now, when you will be 70? Am I correct?
Thanks for telling everybody that. The thing is, they think I'm like 45, 50, but thanks to the IBJ, suddenly people know how old I really am. But
how is the university going to be different? What state do you want it to be in? I don't know if you're planning on staying around after 4 years, if you want to tilt your hand on that, but what's it going to be like?
Well, everything that I've talked about in terms of our strategic direction, we have to be in a much different place in terms of forms of education that we have here on our campus. It will be a place that the rest of the world is looking at as one of the most innovative. We're already 4 years running with U.S. News, one of the most innovative universities, so we're glad to have that, but that's not good enough. We really need to push on that. So I want us to be the benchmark university in terms of how we've changed and advanced in a way that perhaps others haven't quite picked up on. So I want to be ahead on that. So the focus on education, forms of education, opportunities, I would like to see a much larger array of those, that we've got a lot of things on the rails at that point. We're really, really excited about building on the strength across business, innovation, technology, and the sciences. We've put up a $50 million business school. That's a big investment. We're investing $100 million in the sciences for renovation and for an additional building. And we see that because that's where the needs are of this community and opportunities are for future students and growth, right? And across the way those things are connected, because they're very much connected. And when you put together things like, our technology, our folks thinking about analytics, for example, with those that are thinking about technology, with business, our healthcare, boy, there's going to be a lot of opportunities in the future economy for that. I want to see Butler on the leading edge and putting into place some programs and courses that are supporting Indianapolis, Indiana, and beyond.
Great. Well, I usually say, hey, we'll check back with you in 1 year, see how things are going. Maybe I should go too.
Yeah, give us a couple years, but but then I'll be even more youthful looking. So it'll all be great. Yeah, so.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Good. Thank you so much.
My thanks again to James Danko. If you're interested in learning more about Butler's president, IBJ's Sam Quinn wrote about his journey from longtime entrepreneur to higher ed administrator in last week's IBJ. You can find that story at ibj.com. And while you're at it, you can check out the lead stories from this week's paper. John Russell examines the success of Zionsville-based BHI Senior Living. That's the developer of the upscale 500-unit Hoosier Village campus, which has a long waiting list. John reports that BHI is thriving in a tough market for retirement communities. Back in Indianapolis, Democrats on the city-county council raised some hackles when they recently proposed more than doubling the base pay for their part-time positions. Now, that's an easy thing to criticize, but as Sam Quinn reports this week, the base pay hasn't changed in more than 30 years, and Indianapolis counselors are vastly underpaid compared to some nearby peer cities. And we have a classic tale of entrepreneurial ingenuity. Sam Stahl has the story behind Fatheads, that's with a Z. which makes plus-size eyewear. It was started by Indianapolis resident Rico Elmore after he couldn't find any sunglasses that would fit his generously sized melon. Again, you can find all these stories in the latest issue of IBJ, which you undoubtedly have delivered to your home or office, and online at ibj.com. And remember, for full and unfettered access to all of IBJ's award-winning business content, just hit the subscribe button. So, thanks again for making time this week for the IBJ podcast, which is edited by Leslie Weidenbenner. I'm Mason King, and we'll be back again next week.